Welcome to the March 2020 edition of CIECAST. I'm Ed Weidman, Executive Director of CIECA. This month, Michael Ortega, Senior Director of Application Development at Insurance Auto Auctions, will be discussing the key collaboration, combining technology and communication. Michael has 5 years of management experience within IAA, leading diverse technical teams on a variety of projects with a focus on networking, compliance, and information security. He is currently responsible for the development, maintenance, and running of IAA's external applications for sellers, applications for buyers, as well as IAA's application integration platform. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you that there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenters. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the webinar navigation pane on your screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now, I'll turn the program over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you everyone out there who's joining us live or maybe listening into the recording. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen into this webcast, and hopefully we're going to provide you some value here on some new ways to collaborate or reaffirm some of your existing tools and techniques. As Ed mentioned, my name is Michael Ortega. I'm Senior Director of Application Development. It includes product delivery at IAA. And you may be sitting there asking yourself, who is IAA? You know, we are a vehicle marketplace experts. Day in and day out, we provide we're able to connect buyers and sellers together in order to not only move salvage vehicles and bring that to the salvage life cycle, but charity vehicles, remarketing vehicles are all in our wheelhouse. We're an organization that really sees technology as an enabler that really embeds that into our operational process, whether it's taking images of our vehicles or finding ways to optimize and provide better data through data science to our buyers and or sellers. Foundational into who we are is really our ability and drive to innovate. We find that it helps provide efficiency into kind of the day-to-day and really embed into our culture, and that's really the antithesis of this presentation and how we started exploring new tools and new ways to collaborate just to really find efficiencies in how we deliver our services to both our partners and our customers. With that said, before I jump into the main core of our presentation, there's a small disclaimer that you know my legal group, excuse me, asked me to make, and that's kind of a general "your miles may vary" kind of disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes. Take that into consideration as you're looking at these tools. Ultimately, what I'm trying to cover in this presentation is not only how we use an effective tool like OpenAPI Swagger, but how you bring that into your overall process and how you deliver projects and collaborate through integration. With that being said, and my legal team happy, hopefully, we'll go ahead and jump into, you know, talk about really what are ways that we can improve our users in the instance of IA, you know, find efficiencies for our adjusters. How do we free them up into looking at really doing value add work for our customers? I think we've all been into our operational areas where we see an adjuster or a CSR or a call agent with two different screens. One that's their primary operating system, and the secondary one that's you know, a third party, a partner web portal. And you know, we've seen time and time again where they're doing dual entry into both of those systems. And really, through the work of integration, we could quickly replace that manual way of re-entering data that currently exists, right? Data that's being exchanged between two systems, eliminates any keying errors, improves the data accuracy, which ultimately helps reduce overall cycle time. So the agent time is saved, and we could reallocate those people to doing more value add for the business. And ultimately, through that data integrity, we're finding new ways that to address issues before it even happens. In the vehicle life cycle we have today, getting an incorrect pickup address leads to additional phone calls, additional manual work that needs to be done if something was keyed incorrectly. And through integrations, we're able to address that. So we're meeting the business need. We're adding timeliness, reducing, hopefully, overall cycle time, and again, kind of providing that data accuracy. But overall, that's a real kind of generic way to kind of think about why we integrate. As we approach different projects, different needs, there's really specific goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve. And really thinking about those objectives is really kind of defined, right? As you start a new project, you're going to want to integrate either with a customer, so overall help with their life cycle or their operational goals, or it may be to provide an additional service. And we're going to start talking about here in our next slide of how do we really set ourselves up for success there. So, I think there's 5 key elements to make sure that you're starting off in any project in a successful manner. One is really being able to provide some type of project kickoff. As I mentioned in the previous slide, understanding your objectives, understanding your goals is key there, but bringing that common understanding to across the teams that you're going to be working on is ensuring that you're setting yourself up in an overall successful manner. In a traditional manner, we definitely encourage to do that face-to-face, and that really allows someone to be a little bit more than just a voice on the phone. Now, under our current climate, obviously that's a little bit more difficult to do, but even just as simple as turning on that webcam to get that view and understand that person, it definitely brings a higher level of collaboration, especially if you're looking at a project that you're executing over 2, 4, 6 months or what have you. That also puts you in a position to kind of understand that overall vision. While obviously you want to focus on a minimal viable product and getting that out to the market, what you want to also consider is how do you build for the future? So are we really looking at a quote unquote phase 1, and what's that vision there to really deliver something so that when that phase 2, phase 3 portion of the project, you're not rebuilding or refactoring anything that you previously you've done. So that's really being able to provide that vision overall to the team, so we have that common shared understanding again. The next element really is talking about workflow. While sometimes it's easy as technologists to really focus in on, what the API does, how it's set up, what kind of responses we're going to get, the overall value that you're chasing is how this play into the operational process. Where does this fit in? How will users interact with that? Sometimes even walking through the existing web portals or applications provides value to understand that. But you really want to kind of map out end-to-end process from, if we're talking going from FNOL to settlement in the example of salvage, really kind of understanding what that looks like, what the adjuster is doing in every step of that process, who's interacting, and what type of updates you're expecting to receive, helps you really position that and understand where your technology is going to come in and how that really provides that overall view and perspective. Getting to know one another. We've had the opportunity to work with several different partners, several different customers, and while we all have a mixture of technology, whether that's .NET, Java, etc., understanding how we're developing, how we're coming to market. You know, there's several organizations now that have made their agile transformations, and while they, you know, multiple teams could be using Scrum, understanding when delivery cycles and release cycles happen is very key, so that, you know, it allows you to kind of better plan what's going on. You know, depending on the nature of the project, it even may be worth syncing up, you know, sprints so that they're occurring at the same time, and delivery teams are overall but kind of better able to plan, which very well segues into the next component here, which talks about deliverables and milestones. You know, now that we have this common understanding, we know how we're going to work together. It's really about, what are we delivering at the end of the day? What does that look like in the interface? And what are the dates that we're going to kind of track to make sure that we stay on target and on focus there overall? That really kind of helps drive, you know, obviously the project management portion of it, and ensures to our stakeholders that we're in a position to success. We have some targets, and we know what can be expected and when. So starting off on the right foot is obviously great, but there's still work to be done while you're actually executing into that project. Three kind of key components on the collaboration piece is really making sure, one, that you're checking in with each other along the way. You know, while we're agile, we don't necessarily, well, a lot of organizations are agile and don't necessarily, quote unquote, like status meetings or cringe at status meetings. It does become important. You know, I've seen some organizations that no longer do status meetings, but there's a cross-team sync that happens, so that it's well understood, and you know, there's transparency into what's being delivered. But at least checking in weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the complexity of your project, is key. The second thing is really working together to understand testing plans, not only the environments that are being shared, but actually going to some of the test cases. We've worked with partners that have, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of test cases. And while we've done the pre-work to set ourselves up right and understand workflow and understand vision, sometimes there's test cases that the tester is bringing up that, you know, bring out other items or things that we need to plan for, or allows us to better understand how we best support that partner or customer into going. So it's a detailed process, but again, you're really setting yourself up well to understand the positioning, understanding what's being expected, and making sure that those needs are being met on both sides of the table. Lastly, it is really the tools that you use to enable the team overall. And you know, I'm going to highlight three specific tools, and obviously kind of dig a little bit deeper into the last one. But the first one is really documentation. You know, whether you're documenting that workflow and building out a brand new API, or you have an existing API that you're using to integrate with, having that documentation, understanding what authentication looks like, understanding what that service response is going to do, providing sample schemas is a great way to make sure that as you're running your project, that there's an active exchange and a common understanding of what's happening there. And that's typically, you know, works really well for the product person, the tester who can dig into that level of documentation. The next tool really is on the collaboration front. Finding tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams or any of the other collaborative meeting workspaces is a great way to get real-time feedback as you're developing. In certain projects, we've actually set this up. We set up Microsoft Teams between ourselves and another organization So as the developers were developing, if they had a quick question on how the API was working or what was happening on the opposite end, they were able to get real-time feedback by posting into Teams, starting a new thread and having a quick conversation, getting a quick answer, and not necessarily waiting for a status meeting or a sync meeting. They were able to continuously develop because they had access to their peer on the other team. And then lastly, looking at tools like OpenAPI and Swagger, that really allows you to find different ways and more technical ways to collaborate. And that's really where we're going to focus and jump in here. So I've said it a few times, OpenAPI Swagger, what is it? It is a free and open source framework, and what it does is really provides a language agnostic interface for to a REST API, and it allows people to kind of understand, discover that service, and understand the capabilities of that service in a more automated way. So and given that it's a free open source framework, it really provides some flexibility, some capabilities that really are that you wouldn't really necessarily expect in a tool like this. It really helps accelerate the overall development process. So what does that really look like? If you look at what the tool provides, it actually does a handful of things through 4 different components. So we'll talk about that right now. From a design perspective, it really allows you to design and model your APIs. There's capabilities within the tool itself that allows you to focus and design and get a little bit more allows you to be preemptive in the work as you're developing it. It allows you to build, and we're going to talk about that capability, whether it's SDK or server stubs, all is offered within the tool itself. Documentation, and this, while we talked about documentation a little bit ago, this is a little bit more developer-centric API documentation. Again, with the idea of trying to focus in and allowing the developer to get to the code, to develop code much quicker. It allows you to test. It provides some simple functionality to test your APIs without the overhead of developing code, which could be extremely powerful. Sometimes, testers want to test and understand what kind of responses you want to get. Sometimes developers want to look and understand, is this a code issue? Is this an API issue? So there's some really impressive testing capabilities that we're going to show off here in a bit. And then lastly, it really allows you to standardize, enforce your style guidelines across your API architecture. Some of those capabilities are there in the API management tools, but some of those API management tools are not available until you deploy. So this allows, again, from a developer coding perspective, you to get a lot closer and address that. Now, those capabilities are really spread around 4 different Swagger tools. So OpenAPI, you could think of as the organization that provides these tools. Swagger is really the individual tool itself. And there are 4 different components that I listed out here at the bottom. The Swagger editor, which really allows you to write API documentation. This is where you could do your design and describe your APIs. Whether they're new or existing APIs, this is really kind of the editor that allows you to kind of visually render everything. The Swagger Code Gen tool, this is really allows developers to generate client library code for different platforms. Again, I've mentioned this previously, but generating server stubs or client SDKs, it really acts as an accelerator to software engineers to really be able to build much quicker. The Swagger UI, this is where the self-generated documentation is really available to the different platforms, and it's fully customizable so that really the tool could be hosted in any environment, whether you're developing for on-prem platforms or in the cloud, you could expose Swagger UI and allow your partners, providers to really interact with them overall. I've also seen in some instances, even in my own organization, where we have a number of teams working with different APIs, that we're exposing Swagger internally. So it can act as an accelerator in that fashion as well. So even your own internal teams where they're working with multiple APIs could use this kind of tool to find some better collaboration. And lastly, the last component is the Swagger Inspector. This tool really is designed for some testing and auto generation of some of that documentation. Some of the capabilities seem like they overlap, but the documentation is again kind of really flexible. And this is where, when you think about your implementation, you may choose to implement one or two components, and you don't have to implement all four. So you have some flexibility, you have some capability in how you use the product and where it best fits into your overall life cycle and your overall delivery process. So I've done a little bit of talking, and really where I would like to take us next is to really demo what we've done here and talk about and show off a little bit of the Swagger capabilities. We're going to try to get three things accomplished here, and that is going to be exploring the UI. I really want to show how we could test without doing any development at all against the API. And then from a development perspective, show how it could plug into your existing IDE and as a way to really accelerate your overall development process. So with that said, we're going to jump into this. This is actually not a live demo. This is a video recorded demonstration. I did not want to tempt the demo gods, but this is solely focused against the assignment service that we have created internally to IAA. First and foremost, what you're going to see here is this is the UI, and it allows a couple of different pieces of functionality. This is served through the browser. If there were multiple services here, multiple servers, you would be able to choose a drop-down. In our instance, we only have one. Over on the right-hand side, you can see there's authorization. If we click on that window, what happens is that it brings up some basic authorization. And here we're just using some basic auth, and I could put in my username and password to really handle that, which I'll do in the background here shortly. If we scroll down here in a minute, what we're able to do is through this documentation, through the documentation capability, is really start exploring some of the schema. Understanding the different attributes, we'll go ahead and start expanding perhaps contact name and explore the different attributes here. We could see that job title, birth date, employer, those are all strings that we could pass along. And we could do that across the schema. Again, what this really allows us to do is have a more interactive way than just standard documentation to explore the schema. It's really more attractive from a development perspective, who typically won't read, a 40, 45 page API document. What you see as well is in this instance, I have two assignment services. One is a standard assignment service, and the other is the CIECA standard assignment service. And I really want to start exploring my CIECA assignment service. So I'm going to click on that link here. And once I do that, I'm going to see that my window has expanded, and I'm able to see a couple of things. One, if I have any parameters that were being passed to that service, they would be listed here. Two, from a request body perspective, you can see I have a number of different options, whether it's JSON, text XML, application XML. For our instance here, we're going to change that to application XML. And you can see that in that center box here, the example value really focused, or really changed to the XML format. And I could explore this, understand what sample I've set up, understand what's happening there. So I'm tying the schema data in and looking at that as well. At the bottom of the screen, we have some responses, some codes. We're going to revisit that here in a minute. But as well as in this specific component of the inspector, we're going to, again, still have additional flexibility to look at more documentation. Again, really expanding on the schema overall, understanding what's being passed, understanding the different attributes that's available in the schema. Again, this is the CIECA format, so you could see all the different flexible attributes that we could pass as part of the API. Now, what I really want to do next is really show off how can we test it out. So I'm going to click on try it out here at the top. And when I do that, my example XML here is going to change. It's going to go from black to white. And I'm actually able to edit these values right now. So I could actually go in and person's name, I could change Stephanie Bauer. I could change that here to a Mickey Mouse or what have you. But if I click on execute, I'm actually able to send this request over to the API itself. You can see here that it's currently loading, so that request is actually being sent. In this case, I was using a development environment. It took a little bit longer than expected. But in the response section, you can see that it's changed significantly. At the very top, if I want to use a tool like curl and post this manually, I could do that. It shows me the request URL, the server that it was actually hit. And then I see two different areas. My HTTP code response was a 200 here. And I look at the response header, so I can understand exactly what server I'm interacting, what timestamp, all the information I would expect to see from the headers. But what's key here is the response body, what actually was returned from the service for the business data that I actually sent. What I did here was I chose to download it and be able to interact with it and see what actually was responded from the service. What you can see is with the data that I sent, this was actually rejected. I'm going to pause the video here for a second. What you see here is it was actually rejected. I do have an error, and the error that was passed was some invalid password. So I was able to quickly see that, yes, I was able to interact, but I have an invalid password. I'm going to go back to the authorization piece, excuse me, in the UI, and I'm going to change my username and password. And this is not validated automatically. It's only when I'm sending the request. Now I'm able to, again, re-execute after I validate. And when I do that, I should again see what I saw last time in terms of the API responding, the responses being sent back. And when we get the response, I really want to hone in here on what the body looks like and see what's actually in the body. So I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit, and I'm looking for two different things. And one, I want to make sure that it was accepted, which if I look at the request, the response body, I see it was requested. And two, I want to make sure that a stock number was issued. And this is the unique identifier in the system that allows us to validate, yes, we could track this throughout the rest of the vehicle life cycle overall. So I know that I was successful. My authentication worked. And what I was able to do here was really highlight a few things. I was able to come in, explore the schema through the documentation, use the editor to understand that, and then I was able to use Swagger Inspector to again explore documentation and go in and test against my API, again without developing any code. So a tool like that could be exposed to a developer to test, like I said, or a tester that wants to understand the API overall. Now, where we're going to go is we're going to explore the API, or excuse me, the IDE plugins. In this instance, we're going to explore with Visual Studio and kind of show off a little bit here of while that was a web-based tool, how we could do it directly from a tool like Visual Studio that developers are using in and day out. First, from an installation perspective, I'm going to go to my extensions and updates. I'm going to go to online and Visual Studio Marketplace. And once I'm there, I'm going to type in Swagger. And I'm going to be looking for a tool for my response that allows us to interact with the server. And that component first needs to be installed and then allows us to interact there. So there, the connected service allows us to connect to Swagger Endpoint API. I'm going to go ahead and choose download. And that will be downloaded, and you can see that there are other Swagger components that I have available. I usually take the one directly from Swagger, which typically has to be towards the top. And we'll go through the installation process. The installation process, if you're not familiar with it, really is you have to close Visual Studio, reopen it, and go through the installation. What's important to highlight as we're going through the actual plugin install is, while I'm showing this in Visual Studio today, this could be used, there's lots, as this is open source, it plugs into many different IDEs, whether using Eclipse or any other IDEs. There are plugins that allow you to interact directly with that. And of course, with any installation, it may take a second or so. We're going to go ahead and choose close that. And we're going to go back in and open Visual Studio. Once Visual Studio is open, I'm going to go in and create a new project and go into an existing project and set up my set up my Swagger so that I'm pointing to the endpoint and that I'm able to connect to it. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm opening an existing project, and what you see here, I apologize here, team, that the window seems to minimize a little bit, but we'll move on from here. But in the connected service, really what I'm trying to do is I'm pointing to the endpoint. I'm choosing my project name. I was afraid it was going to happen. Give me 1 second. I'm choosing my project, opening my project here, connecting into the service. And then once I'm connected to the service, what it really allows me to do is at a code level, be able to interact with the API. Whether I'm grabbing portions of the SDK, or interacting with the service directly, or understanding different parameters that could be passed. This is all happening in a much more automated fashion overall. I apologize. It seems like I may have tempted the demo gods here today. So after I'm not able to. Great. Thank you for your help there, Ed. Apologize about that, folks. So before we jump into some final thoughts here, it's important that, you know, we talked about the initiation and execution of the project. We talked about how we could use a tool like Swagger into your project to find better ways to collaborate. You know, it's also very important to make sure that you end off that project well. And there's really four key ways. One, obviously, is work through a project retrospective. Find out what went well, what you could do better, and any organization that's looking for ways to find continuous improvement, getting active feedback from your partners and customers is a phenomenal way. So completing that retrospective is a great way to end that project and find ways that you can improve in the future. Secondly, look for ways for ongoing communications. You know, oftentimes, as I mentioned before, understanding the full vision, this may be only phase one or just the MVP of a specific implementation. So understanding that we're going to be touching base in 2 weeks or a month or 3 months to initiate that that conversation, or understand that we're on track, or things that need to be worked on is a great way. So establish that as quickly as possible, whatever that regular cadence looks like for you. Next is measuring success. You know, you initiated that project, you understood your goals, your objectives. Did you meet your targets? Were you able to reduce some of the human components or human time into the overall life cycle? Were you able to get the volume that you're expecting? Are you scaling to the needs, or depending on your specific rollout or implementation? Are you able to really kind of meet that overall demand? And then lastly, make sure that you have operational context. You know, from a technical perspective, there's always some things that could go bump in the night. Making sure that you have a contact that you could reach out to at 10 o'clock, that operations person, to understand what's happening there is a great way to make sure that the service is up, it's available, it's reliable, and that, again, you're continuing to work through that as a valued partner. Ed, if you could help me one more time, please, or probably 2 more times, to progress the slide. I just want to talk about a few final thoughts. If we go back one more, please. A few final thoughts. You know, we focused in on OpenAPI Swagger tools, and really just to highlight, it's really our capability to assist in the collaboration across organizations, across teams. It's not the sole focus, but it plays a critical piece into delivering and being able to deliver successful projects. Make sure that, you know, you're constantly communicating. It leads to common vision, understanding, and reduces overall any churn or waste into the entire process. And then lastly, make sure that you're getting feedbacks. That ultimately leads to ways that you can continue to refine, get better, not only from a services perspective, but from an overall delivery perspective. Ed, I'm going to try to advance one more time. Hopefully, yes, it likes me this time. With that said, I would like to thank everyone for listening in today. I would like to thank Ed, Stacy, and Charlie from the CIECA group. IA has been a long-time CIECA member, and we're constantly finding the information that's being provided, the industry insights, invaluable. So if you're not a member, please consider joining. But the team here is phenomenal to work with. So we definitely appreciate this opportunity to present and talk about our experiences and work with the team overall. So With all that being said, we left plenty of time for some questions here at the end. I guess, Stacy, Ed, do we have anything online that we can answer?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Stacy Phillips, our CIECA's marketing director, has been monitoring the webinar for questions. Hey, Stacy, have we received any questions from the attendees?
We wanted assurance that the webinar will be recorded, which it was recorded and will be available online later today or by tomorrow morning on the CIECA website for anyone who would like to share with a coworker. We don't have any other
no other questions
at this time. Not at this time.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Our next CIECAST will be on Tuesday, April 21st at 11 a.m. Central Time. Connor Smith, Senior Manager of OEM for CARSTAR, will discuss the importance of OEM guidelines in an environment of frequent vehicle advancement. He will also share how steps to review guidelines can be added to the repair process, where information can be accessed, and how to make it a priority for teams. Don't forget to check CIECA.com for a full schedule of future broadcasts. It is available under the Events tab at the top of the page. CIECA has partnered with the Automotive Management Institute. Attendees of this webinar can take a short quiz on the AMI website to earn credit toward a professional designation. A link to AMI is available on CIECA.com. Please follow CIECA's media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and CIECA news. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.